Hi, guys and gals. Shane Stevenson here at the Buffalo Naval Park. And for today's video, I'm going to be reviewing our 1812 cannons. These are kind of the first things that people see because they're right outside of our museum building in kind of a gathering space. And yes, kids like to climb on them and take pictures with them, which is ultimately okay. So there's muddy waters, all right, with a rival here at the Buffalo Naval Park who donated them, but the provenance is really strong for up to their donation here. And I'm going to keep searching the records that I continue to find for more information about these cannons. All right, so I do have a PowerPoint, so I'll bring that up and away we go. Let's see here. There we go. So this is one of the two cannons, and they are both facing roughly towards each other at an angle. So this is a picture of one of them. You'll see the cannon carriage, which obviously is not 1812 vintage. And you can see how nice they are because my father last fall painted them and scraped them. So thanks, Dad. He really enjoyed doing that work too, which was nice. Okay, so you can't really speak of our 1812 cannons without talking about these two vessels. All right, in the upper left is the HMS Caledonia, a 3-gun brig, probably 6-pounder. And in the lower right, the 6-gun brig, 6-pounder HMS Detroit. So these ships have their fate intertwined throughout the course of their history, and it's instrumental to the story of how we got these cannons. So, a little background: HMS Detroit in the lower right is constructed at Detroit as USS Adams, named after the second president, John Adams. Right, she's completed roughly around 1799, 1800, and then goes into service as the first U.S. Navy vessel on Lake Erie. The HMS Caledonia is constructed across the Detroit River at a place called Amherstburg, and she's put into service roughly around 1807, 1808. So a few years younger. And again, a 3-gun brig for the Caledonia, 6-gun brig for the Adams. Flash forward now, August of 1812. America surrenders Detroit to the British, and the USS Adams becomes the HMS Detroit. And that's August of 1812. Now you flash forward to October of 1812. Both of these ships are parked and moored off of Fort Erie. Now, Fort Erie is literally a village across the Niagara River from Buffalo, but of course, named after a fort that was there, which there's still is still historic. It's a historic fort today. All right, so it's been preserved, or a lot of it's been preserved. So I'm going to show you the night naval boarding action for these two ships. First, I'm going to give you the perspective, certainly different than 1812, but what Jesse Elliott, when he rounded up the 100 sailors and soldiers to capture the Caledonia and the Detroit, were potentially looking at. So this is a view and a shot from the bow of the Little Rock, our Little Rock, right? You're looking down the Buffalo River into Lake Erie, and then on the right-hand side is the beginning of the Niagara River. The line of trees in the distance is Canada. I did a little zoom in there in the lower right. Fort Erie, the actual fort, is just off to the right of this screen. And unfortunately, with the tree line and things like that on this side of Buffalo, or on this side of the river, you can't really see Fort Erie very well. But that's how close it is. So now let's take a look at a Google map. All right. The view I was looking at is right there in the lower center. There's the Buffalo River. Where I have the red lines, that's the Caledonia and the Detroit. And that green area is where Fort Erie was. Now, right across the way, I should have highlighted it. If you look off to, say, uh, just a few degrees north and east, on the American side, you'll see a long strip of land and what looks to be like a reddish building. That was right where Fort Porter was. Okay, so now you can have cannon fire going from Fort Porter in America to Fort Erie, and certainly as you go up the Niagara frontier, into or down the Niagara frontier or north, depends on if you're talking about land or river, right? So you're going down the Niagara River, but up in terms of land because it's north. You had the same thing with Fort Niagara and Fort George. They were able to bombard each other uh, at near the mouth of Lake Ontario. So you have Jesse Elliott with 100 men. I can only presume small boats, 50 in each, maybe. Right. And they do a night action of boarding these two vessels in what's called like a cutting out action. Right. And it's an offensive action where you have a small boat pull alongside, climb up to the main deck, and overrun your enemy. Very daring, October 8th / October 9th. So maybe it started on the 8th, and then because it's through the night, it carries into the 9th because I've seen both in reports, the 8th and the 9th of October, 1812. It must be pitch black. All right. Certainly without electricity, things like that on this Niagara frontier. About 500 people in Buffalo. Uh, Probably not that many at Fort Erie. All right. You can see the size of the village today on the left-hand side of the map. It is a city, I believe, but a smaller city. And so if you're out there in the river, you probably can't be noticed at all at that time. And then you'll see where Lake Erie funnels into the Niagara River. All right, and so you're getting all the water from Superior, Huron, Michigan, Lake Erie, all being funneled into this smaller area. So right where I have the lines after the capture, it really gets pretty treacherous out there. The current picks up, it's swift, it's choppy, there's cross currents. All right, so Jesse Elliott and the 100 Americans, they capture successful boarding action. They're now going to take both vessels to the U.S. Navy Yard at the Scajaquada Creek in Black Rock. All right, Buffalo and Black Rock were competing villages, and then over time, Buffalo just absorbed Black Rock. So you'll see as we're going down the Niagara River, all right, now you see the big black X because HMS Detroit accidentally was beached on what is now known as Unity Island. And of course, that's not a great distance. Cannons from Britain were able to penetrate and hit American forces on the American side. So there's some action to try and to try and get it unbeached and free from the island, probably a sand dune or a sandbar or something like that. And they're unsuccessful. So they decide to set it ablaze. And so they all transfer to the HMS Caledonia. And now this is just the Google map just above, right where we were. I didn't want to try and squeeze it onto one map. You'll see again the X roughly where the HMS Detroit was beached and then burned. And now the Caledonia is able to go up Black Rock Creek, make that little jog, the blue line you see there, into the Skajakwada Creek. And then that's roughly where the U.S. Navy Yard was for refitting and things like that. So the HMS Caledonia goes on to serve September of 1813, the Battle of Lake Erie, and fight against the British and successfully expunge the British from Lake Erie. So she has a nice career. The Detroit's sitting there burning, and lo and behold, cannons are located there. So that's where our cannons come from. About 165 years after the burning, there's divers down there. They locate these two cannons. They get them raised. They do a little research using the Buffalo Harbor Museum and other Great Lakes museums around the region, Canada, and on the other lakes, and say, well, these cannons must be from the HMS Detroit because there was no other shipwrecks around that area. I don't know what happened to the other four, but they were able to raise two of them and then donate them to the Buffalo Naval Park. For the Caledonia, that's an interesting story. Survives the war. And then her path diverges a little bit. There's some talk and some belief and research that she was just scrapped at Erie, Pennsylvania. There's also some talk that she became the General Wayne, which now became a very early lake freighter after the war, transporting goods and people and material, and that she became a shipwreck off of Dunkirk, New York, south of Buffalo. And then in 2010, there's talk that they actually found the shipwreck. New York State has not allowed anyone to do research or raise her, but there is a shipwreck there that many people believe is the USS Caledonia now. But then there's also some research that says that she was just after the war in 1816 or so, she was just scrapped for parts at Erie, Pennsylvania. So it's a really interesting story. All right, hope you enjoyed it. And again, these cannons are on display just on the walkway in the cobblestone area. You can go up to them and see them. And you can now know that they were from a surrendered ship, USS Adams, which turned into the captured ship, the HMS Detroit, burned at Unity Island, sank. Cannons are located by divers, given to the Buffalo Naval Park in probably the early 80s, where they've been ever since. So 1812, all along the Niagara frontier, there's fighting, of course, back and forth. You had Fort Porter, you have Fort Erie, you have Fort Niagara, you have Fort George. All right, we cross over and we burn Newark, which is now Niagara on the Lake. They come over and burn Buffalo. All right, so there was a lot of tense fighting around this region. And I'm just glad that we actually have true artifacts from the HMS Detroit. I'll say USS Adams. Well, thank you very much. Please leave comments, questions, thoughts. If you've taken a picture sitting on the cannons, please share them. All right. And you know what? We'll see you again soon. And thanks again for all of your support.